Sometimes life sends you exactly what you need, just when you think you have nothing left to give. Noah Calder has been raising his 8-year-old son alone in the quiet harbor town of Millfield Cove, working dawn patrol shifts and coming home to empty dinner plates and bedtime stories for one. 3 years since his wife passed, he's built a simple life around duty and devotion, never asking for more than steady work and his boys' laughter, echoing through their small cottage by the water. Then one gray morning changes everything. Through the fog, Noah spots 2 children clinging to the wreckage of a capsized yacht, crying for help in voices that cut straight through his weathered heart. He pulls them to safety without a second thought, wrapping them in his patrol jacket and speaking in the gentle tones that once soothed his own son's nightmares. What Noah doesn't know is that these aren't just any children. They belong to Aurora Dayne, a tech billionaire whose empire spans continents, but whose heart has been closed for business since the day she became a mother. But here's the question that will change both their lives forever. What happens when the universe decides 2 broken families are meant to become whole? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's gentle hum at 4:30 a.m. had become Noah, Calder's most faithful companion over the past 3 years. Not harsh or jarring, he'd learned that waking up angry only made the day harder to bear. Instead, he'd chosen a sound like distant waves, something that eased him from sleep rather than yanking him from whatever dreams still visited him in the quiet hours before dawn. His bare feet found the cold hardwood floor of the bedroom he'd once shared with Emma, though her side had long since grown cold. The morning ritual was practiced now, almost meditative. Pull on yesterday's jeans from the chair, grab a clean Harbor Patrol shirt from the dresser, splash cold water on his face in the bathroom mirror that reflected back a man who looked older in his 34 years. The lines around his eyes weren't from laughter anymore. They were from squinting into too many sunrises alone, searching the horizon for something he couldn't name. Down the narrow hallway, he paused outside Jamie's door, listening for the steady rhythm of his son's breathing. 8 years old, all elbows and knees and endless questions about why the tide came in and went out, why seagulls sounded angry, why Mama couldn't come back even though the ocean brought back everything else eventually. Noah had stopped trying to answer that last question with anything more than gentle redirection and extra hugs. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the pancakes they'd made together the night before Jamie's attempt at Sunday dinner, which had resulted in more batter on the counter than in the pan. Noah smiled at the memory as he started the coffee maker, the old machine Emma had insisted on keeping even when they could afford something newer. Character, she'd said, running her paint-stained fingers along its dented chrome surface. Everything worth keeping as character. He missed her voice in the morning most of all. Not the grand pronouncements or the passionate discussions about her art, but the small sounds, the way she hummed while making coffee, the soft sigh she'd make when she stretched awake, the gentle, "Good morning, my love," that had greeted him for 7 years of marriage. Now the house held only the sounds of one man trying to fill the space where 2 had lived. The coffee was strong and black, the way his father had taught him during those early morning fishing trips when Noah was Jamie's age. "Life's bitter enough without asking for sugar," his father had said, though Noah suspected the old man had just been too stubborn to admit he'd grown to like it that way. Now Noah understood there was honesty in bitter things, a clarity that sweetness could mask. Through the kitchen window, Millfield Cove stretched out in the pre-dawn darkness, a crescent of weathered docks and sleeping boats that had sheltered 3 generations of fishing families. The harbor lights reflected off the black water like fallen stars, and somewhere out there, the ocean breathed its eternal rhythm against the rocky shore. This place had been Emma's choice, not his. She'd fallen in love with the way the light changed throughout the day, how it painted the water in shades that had no names. "I could spend forever trying to capture this," she'd whispered during their first visit, her artist's eye already composing scenes he couldn't see dot forever. The word sat heavy in his chest as he finished his coffee and reached for his jacket. She'd gotten 3 years instead of forever. 3 years of rising before dawn to catch the perfect light. 3 years of filling canvas after canvas with seascapes that now lined the walls of their home like windows into her soul. Noah couldn't bring himself to move them, couldn't bear to pack away the proof that she'd been here, that she'd seen beauty in this place they'd chosen together. The harbor patrol station sat at the end of the main pier, a weathered building that had stood against storms and salt air for 40 years. Noah's father had worked here before him, and his father before that, a legacy of Calder's keeping watch over Millfield Cove's waters. The tradition had felt natural once, like putting on a well-worn coat. Now it felt like wearing someone else's, clothes familiar but not quite fitting right out inside. The radio crackled with the morning weather report. Fog bank rolling in from the northeast, visibility dropping to less than a quarter mile by sunrise. Noah logged it in the duty book with careful handwriting, the same routine he'd followed for 8 years now. Weather, tide charts, overnight incidents none reported. The summer season was winding down, and the October mornings brought a different quality to the water, something more serious, less forgiving. He thought about Jamie, still sleeping in. His race car pajamas, hair sticking up in impossible directions. The boy would wake in an hour, stumble to the kitchen in search of cereal and orange juice, probably spill something on his school clothes. Mrs. Henderson from next door would check on him before school, make sure he ate something resembling breakfast, walk him to the bus stop with her own grandchildren. She'd been a godsend these past 3 years, never making Noah feel inadequate for needing help, never treating Jamie like a burden. The patrol boat's engine turned over on the second try, a reliable old girl that had seen more miles than most cars. Emma had named her Serenity during one of their weekend trips, back when Noah's job had felt like an adventure they were sharing rather than a responsibility he carried alone. The name had stuck, painted in Emma's careful script along the bow, stern where it caught the morning light. As Noah guided Serenity out of the harbor, the fog began to roll in exactly as predicted. It moved like a living thing, fingers of gray and white reaching across the water, muffling sound and swallowing the familiar landmarks that marked the boundaries of his patrol route. This was the dangerous time, when weekend boaters got caught off guard, when expensive yachts with inexperienced crews found themselves in trouble they hadn't anticipated. The radio shattered occasionally other patrol boats checking in, Coast Guard updates, the harbor master's morning briefing. Noah responded when called, but mostly he listened to the water, the way it sounded different in fog, more intimate somehow. Emma had loved mornings like this, when the world seemed wrapped in cotton and possibility. She'd sit on their dock with her sketchbook, trying to capture the way light diffused through mist, the way familiar things became mysterious and new. He'd been thinking about her more lately. As Jamie's 8th birthday approached, the boy looked more like his mother every day, the same curious eyes, the same way of tilting his head when he was working through a problem. Emma had died when Jamie was 5, still young enough to need bedtime stories and explanations about where Mama had gone. Now he was old enough to ask harder questions, the kind that made Noah's chest tight with inadequacy. "Why don't you date anyone, Dad?" Jamie had asked just last week, the question coming out of nowhere while they were washing dishes together. "Tommy's mom has a boyfriend now. He seems nice." Noah had fumbled for an answer that wouldn't sound like a lie or a lecture. "Sometimes people need time to figure things out," he'd finally said, which was true but incomplete. The complete truth was that he couldn't imagine loving anyone the way he'd loved Emma. Couldn't picture another woman's coffee mug sitting next to his on the kitchen counter, or another voice joining their bedtime ritual. The fog thickened as Serenity moved through the patrol route, and Noah slowed the boat to quarter speed, relying on instruments and instinct to navigate the familiar waters. Somewhere ahead, he could hear the mournful call of a foghorn from one of the larger vessels, probably the ferry making its morning run to the mainland. The sound echoed strangely in the mist, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. This was the part of the job that required absolute attention, when the margin for error disappeared and everything depended on experience and careful judgment. Noah had learned to read the water like Emma had read light, sensing the subtle changes that warned of trouble before it became visible. His father had taught him that patience was a harbor patrol officer's most important tool, patience, and the wisdom to know when to push through and when to wait for conditions to improve. The radio crackled again, a routine check-in from the Coast Guard station 20 miles north. Noah responded automatically, his attention fixed on the world beyond the bow, where fog transformed the familiar into something strange and potentially dangerous. Emma would have loved this, he thought, the way the mist made everything soft and dreamlike. She would have insisted on coming with him, sketchpad in hand, ready to capture whatever beauty revealed itself when the fog finally lifted. But Emma wasn't there to see the fog lift, wasn't there to tease him about his serious patrol face or point out the seals that sometimes followed the boat. Emma was 3 years gone, buried in the hillside cemetery, overlooking the harbor she'd loved, her headstone already weathered by salt air and time. And Noah was alone on the water, keeping watch over a town full of people who'd moved on with their lives while he remained, suspended in the amber of his grief. The fog began to thin as he completed his first sweep of the patrol area, revealing patches of gray water that reflected the overcast sky. Soon Jamie would be waking up, fumbling for cereal, and probably forgetting to brush his teeth, until Mrs. Henderson reminded him. Another day in their carefully constructed routine, another 24 hours of making it work with just the two. Of them. Noah turned Serenity toward the outer markers, where the channel deepened and weekend sailors sometimes found themselves in over their heads. The fog still hung thick in patches, but experience told him it would burn off by mid-morning, revealing whatever the night had brought to his corner of the Atlantic. He settled into the rhythm of the patrol, unaware that this morning's fog concealed something that would change his carefully ordered world forever. The sound reached Noah through the fog like a prayer, half whispered, half screamed. At first he thought it might be seagulls, or the wind playing tricks with the mist, but something in his chest recognized it immediately, the universal call of children in distress. He cut the engine and listened, his hand instinctively reaching for the worn rescue whistle that hung around his neck, a talisman from his father's patrol days. There it was again. 2 voices, high and desperate, calling for help somewhere off his starboard bow. Noah's training kicked in before conscious thought could interfere. Engine back to life, throttle forward carefully, spotlight cutting through the gray curtain that separated him from whatever crisis was unfolding just beyond his vision. Harbor Patrol responding to distress call, he radioed, his voice calm despite the adrenaline beginning to surge through his system. Coordinates approximately 200 yards northeast of Marker 7. Requesting Coast Guard backup if available. The fog seemed to part like theater curtains as he approached, revealing a scene that would replay in his memory for months to come. What had once been an elegant white yacht, maybe 40 feet of sleek fiberglass and chrome, was now a partially submerged wreck listing heavily to port. The stern had already disappeared beneath the dark water, leaving only the bow angled toward the sky like a desperate hand reaching for salvation. Clinging to the tilted deck were 2 children, maybe 7 or 8 years old, their small bodies pressed against the highest point they could find. A boy and a girl, both with dark hair plastered to their skulls by salt spray and fear. They were wearing matching life jackets that looked expensive, but were clearly too large for their small frames. The bright orange foam riding up around their necks as they struggled to maintain their grip on the slippery surface. "We're here," the girl cried when she spotted Noah's patrol boat emerging from the fog. "Please help us. We can't find Mama." Noah's heart clenched at the word. Mama. These weren't just any children. They belonged to someone who might already be lost. Beneath the cold Atlantic waters, he maneuvered Serenity as close as he dared to the wreckage, knowing that one wrong move could either endanger the children further or damage his own vessel's hull on the debris field. He couldn't see beneath the surface. "It's okay," he called. Out, his voice carrying the same gentle authority he used when Jamie woke from nightmares. "I'm going to get you safe." "What are your names?" "Sophia," the girl answered through chattering teeth. "And this is Lucas. He's my brother." Twins, Noah realized, seeing the similarities now that he was closer. The same heart-shaped faces, the same wide eyes that reflected fear and hope in equal measure. They couldn't have been in the water long hypothermia would have claimed them, already in October's unforgiving Atlantic. "Sophia and Lucas," Noah repeated, letting them hear their names spoken with warmth and confidence. "Those are strong names. I'm Noah, and I'm going to bring you aboard my boat now. Can you do exactly what I tell you?" Both children nodded, their trust so complete and immediate that it took Noah's breath away. This was what children did. They believed in rescue, believed that adults would keep them safe even when the world was falling apart around them. Jamie had looked at him the same way during Emma's final days, trusting that Daddy would somehow make everything all right. Noah deployed the rescue platform, a small floating dock that extended from Serenity's stern. The yacht was sinking faster. Now, the angle becoming more severe as water rushed into the hull. There was no time for textbook procedures or waiting for backup. "Sophia, you're going to go first," Noah decided, reading the dynamics between the twins. The girl was clearly the leader, the one Lucas looked to for reassurance. "I need you to let go when I count to 3 and swim to me. The water's cold, but you're wearing your life jacket, and you're strong. Ready?" "What about Lucas?" Sophia asked, her protective instincts overriding her own fear. "He's coming right after you, I promise. ... Noah extended his arms, positioning himself to catch her if needed. The girl's knuckles were white where she gripped the yacht's railing, her small body trembling with more than just cold. ... She looked back at her brother, some silent communication passing between them. Lucas nodded, trying to look braver than any 8-year-old should have to be. 3. Sophia pushed off from the sinking yacht and hit the water with a splash that seemed impossibly loud in the fog-muffled world. The life jacket did its job, keeping her head above the surface as she kicked toward the rescue platform. Noah caught her small hand and pulled her aboard in one smooth motion, immediately wrapping her in the emergency blanket. He kept ready for situations exactly like this. "You did perfect," he told her, meaning every word. "Now let's get your brother." Lucas was crying now, the reality of being alone on the sinking vessel finally overwhelming his brave facade. The yacht groaned ominously as more of its hull disappeared beneath the surface, the deck tilting at an angle that made standing impossible. "Lucas, buddy, I need you to be as brave as your sister," Noah called out. "Same thing, jump on 3 and swim to me. Sophia's right here waiting for you." "I can't swim very good," the boy confessed, his voice barely audible over the sound of water rushing into the yacht's interior. "That's what the life jacket is for," Noah assured him. "You don't need to swim good, you just need to jump and let the jacket do the work. I'll catch you." The yacht shuddered and dropped another foot into the water. There was no more time for reassurance or gradual encouragement. Noah made a decision that went against every safety protocol he'd ever learned. He dove. The October Atlantic hit him like a physical blow, cold enough to stop his heart for a terrifying moment. But muscle memory from years of water rescue training took over, and he swam the short distance to the yacht with powerful strokes. Lucas was sobbing now, his small hands slipping on the wet fiberglass as the deck became increasingly vertical. "I've got you," Noah said, hauling himself partially onto the tilted yacht. "Put your arms around my neck and hold on tight." The boy obeyed without question, his thin arms circling Noah's neck in a grip that spoke of absolute trust. Noah pushed off from the sinking vessel and swam back toward serenity, one arm stroking through the water while the other held Lucas securely against his chest. The life jacket made the boy buoyant, but also bulky, and for a moment Noah wondered if he'd miscalculated, if they'd both end up in the water together, Dot. And Sophia's voice cut through his panic. "Here, grab the rope." The girl had found the rescue line and thrown it toward them with surprising accuracy. Noah caught it and let it pull them to the platform, where he lifted Lucas aboard and collapsed beside both children, all three of them shivering and breathing hard. "Are you hurt?" he asked, running his hands over their arms and legs, checking for injuries his adrenaline might have missed. "Does anything hurt?" Both children shook their heads, though their lips were blue and their teeth chattering violently. Noah wrapped them in every blanket he could find, then started the engine and headed for shore at full throttle. The yacht's final death throes echoed behind them in the fog, metal groaning as the vessel slipped beneath the surface for good. "Where's your mama?" Noah asked gently as they approached the harbor. "Was she on the boat with you?" "She went too. Get help," Sophia answered, her voice steadier now that they were moving toward safety. The engine stopped working, and the boat started sinking. "She put us in the life jackets and said she was going to swim to shore and bring someone back." Noah's heart sank. A grown woman swimming alone in fog and cold water, probably without a life jacket if she'd given priority to her children's safety. The chances of finding her alive were dropping with every minute that passed. "How long ago?" he asked, already reaching for his radio to coordinate a search and rescue operation. "I don't know," Lucas said, speaking for the first time since the rescue. It felt like forever. The harbor appeared through the thinning fog, like a welcome sight from a dream. Noah could see people gathering on the dock word of the rescue had already spread through the tight-knit community. Mrs. Henderson was there with Jamie, his son's face tight with worry, until he spotted Noah's boat approaching safely. But the woman who pushed through the crowd made everyone else fade into background noise. She was tall and elegant even in obvious distress, her dark hair windswept and her expensive clothes damp with salt spray. She ran toward the dock with the desperate urgency of a mother whose world had just collapsed, her eyes scanning the patrol boat for signs of the children she'd clearly lost. "Sophia! Lucas!" she cried, her voice carrying a mixture of relief and anguish that hit Noah like a physical blow. The twins' reaction was immediate and visceral. They threw off their blankets and stood at the bow, waving and calling back to the woman who was obviously their mother. She was alive, which meant Noah's worst fears hadn't materialized. But she was also something he hadn't expected beautiful, in a way that spoke of wealth and sophistication, the kind of woman who belonged in boardrooms and five-star restaurants, not on the weathered docks of Millfield Cove. As Noah maneuvered the boat to the dock, he caught sight of the woman's expression and felt his stomach drop. Relief was there, certainly, but underneath it was something else: anger, suspicion, the look of someone accustomed to being in control, who had just experienced the terrifying helplessness of nearly losing everything that mattered. She was going to want answers. She was going to want someone to blame. And Noah, still dripping wet from his impromptu rescue dive, was about to become the focal point of a storm that had nothing to do with weather and everything to do with the collision between. Two completely different worlds. Thank God, the woman breathed as the boat touched the dock. Then her eyes found Noah's, and her expression hardened. "What took you so long?" "My children have been in the water for over an hour." Noah felt the familiar weight of judgment settle. On his shoulders, the assumption that he hadn't done enough, hadn't been fast enough, hadn't somehow prevented this crisis from happening in the first place. He'd felt it before from grieving families, from people who needed someone to blame when the ocean claimed what it wanted. But as he helped Sophia and Lucas onto the dock and watched them throw themselves into their mother's arms, Noah realized that this woman's anger wasn't really directed at him. It was the fury of someone who just faced the possibility of losing everything, someone who'd been forced to swim away from her children and trust that a stranger would save them. He could understand that kind of anger. He'd felt it himself 3 years ago, when the doctors had run out of options and time had run out on forever. Sometimes fury was the only thing that kept you standing when everything else fell apart. The woman was crying now, holding her children as if she could somehow absorb them back into her body, where they'd be safe from every danger the world could offer. Noah stood quietly beside his boat, water still dripping from his uniform, and wondered how something that had started as a routine patrol had become a moment that felt like it might change everything. The harbor patrol station had never felt smaller than it did, with Aurora Dayne pacing its cramped confines like a caged panther. She'd introduced herself with the crisp efficiency of someone accustomed to having her name recognized, but Noah had simply nodded and offered her coffee, apparently immune to whatever reputation preceded her into his modest domain. "They need to be checked by a doctor," Aurora said for the 3rd time in 10 minutes, her manicured hands gesturing toward Sophia and Lucas, who were wrapped in Noah's spare blankets and sharing a bag of crackers he'd found in his desk drawer. "Hypothermia, potential injuries, psychological trauma. This requires immediate medical attention. Doc Martinez is on his way," Noah replied with the same patient calm he'd maintained since pulling her children from the water. "He's the best we have in Millfield Cove. Been treating everything from fishing hook accidents to heart attacks for 30 years. Aurora's expression suggested that 30 years of small-town medicine didn't quite meet her standards, but before she could voice another objection, the station door opened to admit a kindly-faced man carrying an old-fashioned medical bag that looked like something from a Norman Rockwell painting. "Well now," Dr. Martinez said, his voice carrying the gentle authority of someone who delivered half the babies in town and seen most of those babies grow up to have children of their own. "I hear we've got some young sailors who've had quite an adventure." While the doctor examined the twins with gentle thoroughness, Aurora stood rigid as a sentinel, watching his every move with the intensity of someone who trusted no one completely when it came to her children's welfare. Noah found himself studying her profile, the sharp line of her jaw, the way her hands clenched and unclenched at her sides, the expensive watch that looked out of place in his utilitarian office dot. She was beautiful, he realized, but in a way that seemed almost untouchable. Even disheveled from her emergency swim to shore, even with worry etched deep in the lines around her eyes, she carried herself with the unconscious authority of someone accustomed to having the world rearrange itself around her needs. "They're fine," Dr. Martinez announced, snapping his medical bag closed with a satisfied click. "Core temperature's normal. No signs of injury or distress beyond what you'd expect from their ordeal. Remarkable, really, considering how long they were in the water." "It wasn't that long," Sophia piped up from her chair, her small voice carrying a note of pride. "We're good swimmers. Mama made sure we learned when we were little." Aurora's face softened for the first time since Noah had met her, maternal love temporarily overriding the brittle shell of control she wore like armor. "You were very brave," she told her daughter, brushing a strand of damp hair from Sophia's forehead. "Both of you." "Mr. Noah was brave too," Lucas added, looking up at the man who'd pulled him from the sinking yacht. "He jumped in the water to get me, even though it was really cold." For a moment, Aurora's eyes met Noah's across the small room, and he saw something shift in her expression, a crack in the facade that revealed exhaustion, gratitude, and something else he couldn't quite identify. Then the moment passed, and she was all business again. About compensation, she began, reaching for the designer purse that had somehow survived her swim to shore. I want to make sure you're properly rewarded for what you've done. My assistant can wire whatever amount you think is appropriate. That's not necessary, Noah interrupted, uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. This is my job. I don't rescue people for money. Aurora blinked as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. Everyone has a price, she said, but with less conviction than before. A boat payment, your son's college fund, something? What do you need? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with assumptions Noah found both amusing and slightly insulting. What did he need? He needed Emma back, needed his son to stop asking when Mama was coming home, needed to figure out how to raise a boy into a good man without the woman who'd been better at the job than he'd ever be. But Aurora Dayne's checkbook couldn't purchase any of those things. I need to know they're safe, Noah said simply, nodding toward the twins. That's enough. Before Aurora could respond, the station door burst open again, this time admitting Jamie and Mrs. Henderson. Noah's son took one look at the two children wrapped in blankets and immediately appointed himself their official welcome committee. Hi, Jamie said with the easy confidence of a child who'd never met a stranger. I'm Jamie. My dad's the one who saved you. Are you okay? Do you want to see my boat? He produced a small wooden vessel from his jacket pocket, carved by Noah's own hands during the long winter evenings when grief had needed something to occupy his restless fingers. The boat was simple but beautifully crafted, with clean lines and a tiny mast that actually worked. Sophia and Lucas examined the toy with the serious attention children reserve for truly important things. Did your dad make this? Sophia asked, running her finger along the smooth hull. Hung, Jamie said proudly. He makes lots of stuff. Mama used to paint pictures, but now Dad makes things instead. He says it helps him think. Aurora watched this exchange with growing fascination, her gaze moving between the hand-carved boat and the man who'd created it. Noah felt heat creep up his neck under her scrutiny, suddenly self-conscious about his simple hobby in the presence of someone who could probably buy actual yachts without checking her bank balance. It's beautiful, Aurora said quietly, and Noah was surprised by the genuine appreciation in her voice. You made this yourself? It's nothing special, Noah replied, but Jamie was having none of his father's modesty. It is too special, the boy protested. Dad makes the best boats in the whole world. He's teaching me how, but mine don't look nearly as good yet. Dr. Martinez cleared his throat diplomatically. I hate to interrupt, but I do need to recommend that these children get some rest and a warm meal. They've been through quite an ordeal. Of course, Aurora said, immediately shifting back into protective mother mode. We'll return to our hotel. Actually, Mrs. Henderson interjected with the gentle authority of someone who'd been the unofficial town grandmother for 40 years. The ocean view is completely booked. Has been for weeks with the autumn festival coming up. I called around while Doc was examining the children. There's not a room available anywhere in town. Aurora's composure cracked slightly at this unexpected obstacle. That's impossible. There has to be somewhere. There's my house, Noah found himself saying before he could think better of it. I mean, if you need somewhere to stay until you can make other arrangements. It's not fancy, but it's warm and dry, and Jamie would love the company. The offer surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise Aurora. He'd spoken without thinking, responding to some instinct he couldn't quite name, the same impulse that had driven him to dive into freezing water for a child who wasn't his own. Aurora stared at him as if he'd suggested they all move to Mars. I couldn't possibly impose. It's not imposing, Noah said, warming to the idea despite himself. You'd be doing me a favor, actually. Jamie doesn't get many chances to hang out with kids his own age, especially during the school week. Please, Mama? Sophia asked, looking up at her mother with eyes that could have melted stone. I want to see where Jamie lives, and I want to learn how to make boats like his dad does. Lucas nodded enthusiastically, already absorbed in examining the intricate details of Jamie's wooden vessel. The two boys were comparing notes on its construction with the intense focus of young engineers. Aurora looked trapped between her natural inclination to maintain control and distance, and her children's obvious desire to extend this unexpected adventure. Noah could see the internal struggle playing out across her features, duty warring with impulse, caution battling against something that might have been curiosity. Just for tonight, she said finally, the words seeming to surprise her as much as anyone else. Until I can arrange transportation back to the city. Great, Jamie exclaimed, apparently speaking for everyone in the room. We can show you everything. The lighthouse, and the tide pools, and the place where Dad and I go fishing. And maybe Dad will make pancakes for breakfast. He makes the best pancakes ever. Noah smiled at his son's enthusiasm, remembering when life had been that simple, when the promise of pancakes and new friends could transform any situation into an adventure. Emma would have loved this, he thought. She'd always believed that the best stories began when strangers became friends. When the unexpected knocked on your door and you were brave enough to answer. As they prepared to leave the station, Aurora lingered for a moment while the children gathered their things. Thank you, she said quietly, the words carrying more weight than a simple expression of gratitude for everything. I know I came across as demanding, ungrateful. It's just when it comes to my children, you don't need to explain, Noah said, understanding more than she probably realized. Being a parent means being scared most of the time. You did what you had to do to keep them safe. Something shifted in Aurora's expression again, that same crack in her carefully maintained facade. For just a moment, she looked less like a powerful executive and more like what she actually was, a mother who'd nearly lost everything that mattered to her. I'm not used to depending on other people, she admitted, the confession seeming to cost her something. Maybe that's not always a bad thing, Noah replied, thinking of his own stubborn independence, his own reluctance to accept help, even when it was freely offered. As they walked toward his truck, an aging Ford that had seen better decades. Noah wondered what he'd gotten himself into. Aurora Dayne was clearly from a different world, a place where problems were solved with money and influence rather than patience and neighborly kindness. But her children were just children, delighted by the prospect of adventure and new friends. And Jamie was practically vibrating with excitement at the thought of showing off his home to his new companions. Maybe it would work out. Maybe, for one night, the distance between their worlds wouldn't matter as much as the simple human connections that had brought them together. And maybe, just maybe, Noah would remember what it felt like to have his house filled with voices. Again, to sit around his dinner table with more than just memories for company. The storm warning flag snapped in the wind as Noah raised it at the harbor that evening, its red fabric stark against the darkening sky. Weather conditions were deteriorating faster than predicted, with sustained winds building to dangerous levels, and visibility dropping as another fog bank rolled in from the Atlantic. What had started as a minor weather system was rapidly becoming something more serious, the kind of storm that kept boats in harbor and sensible people indoors. Looks like you're stuck with us a bit longer than expected, Noah said as he secured the flag's rope, speaking to Aurora, who stood watching from the passenger seat of his truck. Through the windshield, he could see the 3 children in the back seat, already deep in animated conversation about plans for the extended sleepover this storm would require. Aurora's phone buzzed insistently in her lap, the 10th call she'd ignored in the past hour. Her assistant, her board of directors, her legal team, all trying to reach her about various crises that seemed monumentally unimportant compared to the fact that her children were safe and warm and giggling with their new friend. I should probably "Take this," she murmured, but made no move to answer the device. "Should and want to are different things," Noah observed, pulling away from the harbor as the first fat raindrops began to spatter against the windshield. Emma used to say that the world would keep spinning whether she answered every phone call or not. Took her a while to believe it, though. It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife so casually, without the careful distance he usually maintained when speaking of the past. Aurora noticed the subtle shift, the way his voice softened around Emma's name, without becoming weighted with the heavy grief she'd glimpsed earlier. What was she like? Aurora asked, surprising herself with the question. She wasn't usually given to personal curiosity about strangers, but something about Noah's quiet presence invited confidence. She was. Noah paused, searching for words that could capture 7 years of marriage in a sentence or two. She believed in beautiful things. Not expensive things necessarily, but beautiful ones. She could find something worth painting in. A tide pool or a piece of driftwood could make you see magic in things you'd walked past 1,000 times without noticing. Aurora's phone buzzed again, and this time she deliberately turned it face down in her lap. Through the back window, she could hear Sophia explaining the rules of some elaborate game involving boats and treasure, her daughter's voice bright with the kind of uncomplicated joy that had become rare in their carefully scheduled lives. "She sounds wonderful," Aurora said quietly. "She was. She would have liked you, I think." The comment hung in the air between them, surprising in its warmth and certainty. Aurora found herself wondering what Emma would have seen in her that would have earned such confident approval. She suspected it wasn't the corporate executive or the tech innovator or any of the other roles she wore like professional armor. Noah's house sat at the end of a tree-lined street that could have been lifted from a Norman Rockwell painting. It was a modest Cape Cod with weathered shingles and window boxes that had clearly been tended by someone who understood that gardens, like children, thrived under patient attention. The front porch held a wooden swing that moved gently in the wind. Storm wind and warm light spilled from the windows in a way that spoke of home rather than merely residence. "It's perfect," Sophia breathed as they climbed out of the truck, and Aurora realized her daughter was right. There was something deeply appealing about the house's unpretentious comfort, its obvious function as a place where real life happened rather than where it was merely displayed inside. The home revealed itself as a careful balance between practicality and warmth. The living room held furniture that was clearly chosen for comfort rather than style, a sofa that invited curling up with books, chairs positioned for conversation rather than formal display. But it was the artwork that caught Aurora's attention and held it. Emma's paintings covered nearly every wall, seascapes and harbor scenes that captured light in ways Aurora had never seen before. They weren't technically perfect. Aurora's trained eye could spot the small imperfections that marked them as the work of a talented amateur rather than a professional artist. But they possessed something more valuable than technical perfection. They radiated love, each canvas a love letter to the place and people that had inspired them. "Mama painted all of these," Jamie said proudly, following Aurora's gaze around the room. "Dad says she could make anything look beautiful, even the old fish cleaning station down at the dock." Aurora moved closer to examine a particularly striking piece of sunset over the harbor, painted with bold strokes that somehow managed to capture both the fierce beauty of the scene and the quiet peace it inspired. In the corner, she could make out Emma's signature and the date, 3 years and 2 months ago. Just months before she died, Aurora realized and felt something tighten in her chest. "I should start dinner," Noah said, perhaps sensing the emotional weight of the moment. "I hope you don't mind simple food. I'm not exactly a gourmet chef. Can we help?" Sophia asked immediately, the question causing Noah to smile in a way that transformed his entire face. "I'd like that," he said. "Jamie's my usual sous chef, but I think we can find jobs for everyone." The kitchen was the heart of the house, clearly designed by someone who understood that the best conversations happened while hands were busy with simple tasks. Aurora found herself stationed at the island, chopping vegetables while Noah worked at the stove, and the children set the table with the careful ceremony of kids who'd been taught that shared meals mattered. "Mama doesn't cook much," Lucas confided to Jamie as they arranged napkins with mathematical precision. "She says she's better at ordering food than making it." "Dad's a really good cook," Jamie replied loyally. "He learned how because Mama got too sick to cook, and he wanted to make. Sure, I still got good food." Aurora felt her throat tighten at this casual revelation of how Noah had stepped into roles that hadn't originally been his, how he'd learned new skills out of necessity and love. Her own relationship with domestic life was more complicated. She employed people to handle the details that kept her household running, freeing herself to focus on the larger responsibilities of her business empire. "What do you do for work?" Noah asked, apparently reading some of her thoughts in her expression. "I run a technology company," Aurora replied, the standard answer she gave at cocktail parties and business conferences. But surrounded by the warmth of this kitchen, with her children chattering happily as they helped prepare a simple meal, the response felt inadequate somehow. "What kind of technology?" Jamie asked with the unfettered curiosity of childhood. Aurora found herself explaining her company's work in terms an 8-year-old could understand: software that helped other businesses run more efficiently, applications that connected people across distances, algorithms that sorted through vast amounts of information to find patterns and solutions. As she talked, she realized it had been years since she'd thought about her work in such fundamental terms. Years since she'd remembered why she'd been drawn to technology in the first place. "That sounds really important," Sophia said seriously. "Do you help people?" The question caught Aurora off guard with its simple directness. Did she help people? Her software certainly made life easier for her corporate clients, and her innovations had generated billions in economic value. But sitting in this kitchen, watching Noah create something nourishing and beautiful from simple ingredients, Aurora found herself wondering when her work had become more about competition and market dominance than about genuine human benefit. "Try to," she said finally, the answer feeling both honest and incomplete. Outside, the storm was building in earnest now, rain drumming against the windows and wind howling around the corners of the house. But inside, the kitchen was a pocket of warmth and light, filled with the comfortable sounds of people sharing space and purpose. Aurora couldn't remember the last time she'd participated in such a scene. Usually her meals were either working dinners with business associates or quiet affairs with just her and the twins, often eaten while reviewing emails or preparing for the next day's meetings. "This is nice," she said softly, the admission surprising her with its spontaneity. Noah looked up from the pasta he was stirring, their eyes meeting across the steam rising from the pot. "It is," he agreed, and Aurora felt something shift between them, a recognition perhaps of what they were sharing in this moment. The dinner that followed was a revelation in simplicity. Pasta with fresh vegetables, a salad made from ingredients Noah had grown in his small backyard garden, bread that he admitted came from the grocery store, but that he'd warmed in the oven until it filled the house with comforting aromas. The children chattered about their adventures of the day, the adults contributing occasional comments that kept the conversation flowing without dominating it. Aurora found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't experienced in years. Her phone remained silent in her purse, ignored by mutual unspoken agreement. The storm outside made the warmth inside feel even more precious, as if they were all sailors who'd found safe harbor after a dangerous journey. When it came time to clean up, everyone pitched in with the easy cooperation of a family unit, though Aurora noticed that Noah seemed to orchestrate the effort with subtle skill, making sure everyone had a role that felt important without overwhelming the smaller children. It was a kind of domestic leadership she'd never witnessed before, quiet, inclusive, focused on the process rather than just the result. As they finished the dishes, Jamie approached her with the shy determination of a child who'd been working up courage for an important question. "Mrs. Aurora," he said formally, "would you like to see my room? I have some really cool stuff, and Sophia and Lucas said they'd like to see it too." Aurora glanced at Noah, who nodded his encouragement. "I'd love to," she said, meaning it completely. The house tour that followed revealed a home where every corner held evidence of the care and attention that had gone into creating not just a place to live, but a place to grow and thrive. Jamie's room was a perfect mixture of boy chaos and parental organization, filled with books and models and drawings that spoke of a child who was encouraged to explore his interests fully. But it was Noah's workshop in the basement that truly captured Aurora's imagination. Here, surrounded by carefully organized tools and half-finished projects, she could see the source of the beautiful objects that appeared throughout the house. The hand-carved boat Jamie had shown them was just one example of Noah's skill. Workshop held wooden bowls, picture frames, toys, and furniture pieces that demonstrated both artistic vision and masterful craftsmanship. "This is incredible," Aurora breathed, running her fingers along a rocking chair that was clearly intended for a child. "You made all of this?" "It's just a hobby," Noah said, but Aurora could hear the quiet pride underneath his modesty. "Keeps my hands busy in the evenings." As the children explored the workshop with the excitement of discoverers in a treasure cave, Aurora found herself thinking about her own evenings spent reviewing quarterly reports, participating in conference calls with international partners, strategizing about market opportunities and competitive threats. Important work, certainly, but suddenly it felt hollow compared to the tangible beauty Noah created with his own hands. The storm showed no signs of abating as they returned upstairs, and Noah began the process of settling everyone for the night. Extra bedrooms were prepared, pajamas were found for the twins, and the bedtime routines that kept family life anchored were adapted to accommodate their unexpected guests. Aurora tucked her children into unfamiliar beds in a stranger's house, but they seemed more excited than anxious about the adventure. As she kissed them goodnight, she realized they hadn't asked about returning to their normal life even once. They were completely absorbed in the present moment, in the new experiences and friendships this day had brought them. Standing in the hallway outside their rooms, Aurora could hear the storm continuing to rage outside. But inside the house, everything was peaceful and warm. Tomorrow would bring decisions about returning to their regular lives, about getting back to the responsibilities and schedules that defined their normal existence. But tonight, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Aurora felt no urgency to be anywhere other than exactly where she was. The storm had passed by morning, leaving behind a world washed clean and sparkling under autumn sunshine that made everything look newly minted. Aurora woke to the sound of children's laughter drifting up from the kitchen below, a sound so natural, and right that for a moment she forgot she was in a stranger's house, in a life that wasn't her own. She found Emma's compass on the knitstand where Noah had thoughtfully placed it the night before, along with a note explaining that his late wife had always kept it there, that it had guided her on morning walks when she searched for subjects to paint. The brass was worn smooth by handling, and when Aurora opened it, the needle swung true north with the confidence of an instrument that had never failed in its purpose. Downstairs, she discovered that Noah had transformed breakfast into an event. Jamie was teaching Sophia and Lucas how to flip pancakes with predictably chaotic but joyful results. Batter dotted the stovetop, flour dusted the counter, and all three children wore expressions of intense concentration mixed with barely contained giggles. "Morning," Noah said, looking up from the coffee pot with a smile that seemed to start in his eyes and work its way down to his mouth. "Hope you slept well." The kids decided they wanted to be breakfast chefs today. Aurora watched her normally. Reserved children collaborating with Jamie as if they'd known each other for years rather than hours. Sophia, usually anxious about messing up or making mistakes, was laughing as she attempted to catch a pancake that had gone airborne during an overly enthusiastic flip. Lucas, who typically needed extensive coaxing to try new things, was already planning his next culinary experiment. "They seem comfortable here," she observed, accepting the coffee Noah offered and noting that he'd remembered exactly how she'd taken it the night before. "Kids adapt faster than adults," Noah replied, watching as Jamie demonstrated the proper wrist motion for pancake flipping with the seriousness of a master chef passing on trade secrets. "They don't carry as much baggage about how things are supposed to be." The comment lingered between them, weighted with implications neither was quite ready to examine. Aurora had built her entire adult life around careful planning and controlled environments, but watching her children thrive in this unstructured, welcoming chaos made her wonder what other experiences she might have denied them in her pursuit of security and success. After breakfast, the children's natural alliance was formalized when Jamie proposed a comprehensive tour of what he called the best places in the whole world, a list that included the lighthouse, the tide pools, and the spot where he and his father went fishing. Aurora found herself agreeing to the expedition with an ease that surprised her, canceling morning conference calls without the usual nod of anxiety such decisions typically produced. The lighthouse stood at the end of a rocky promontory that jutted into the Atlantic like a stone finger pointing toward distant horizons. It had been decommissioned years ago, but the town maintained it as a historical landmark, and the keeper's quarters had been converted into a small museum that told the story of Millfield Cove's maritime heritage. "My great-grandfather worked here," Noah explained as they climbed the spiral staircase toward the light room. "Back when ships still depended on these beacons to find safe harbor in storms." Aurora paused at one of the windows, looking out over the harbor where she could see her children and Jamie collecting shells on the beach below. The view was spectacular, an endless expanse of blue that met the sky at a horizon so perfect might have been drawn with a ruler. But it was the lighthouse keeper's logbook, displayed in a glass case, that captured her attention most completely. The entries were brief but poignant, recording not just weather conditions and ship sightings, but small observations about life in this isolated outpost. "Mrs. Williams brought soup again today." Read one entry from 1943. "The children are growing so fast little Sarah is nearly as tall as her mother now." Storm lasted 3 days, but the light held true. No ships lost on my watch. They understood what mattered, Aurora said softly, reading over the decades of careful entries. "Taking care of people, keeping them safe, still matters," Noah replied, moving to stand beside her at the display case. "The tools change, but the job stays the same." Their eyes met in the reflection on the glass, and Aurora felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition that went deeper than attraction or even compatibility. Here was a man who understood duty, not as burden, but as privilege, who found meaning in service rather than achievement for its own sake. The tide pools revealed themselves, as Jamie had promised, hidden worlds of extraordinary beauty that bloomed to life when the Atlantic retreated. Sophia and Lucas threw themselves into exploration with the single-minded focus that children brought to truly captivating discoveries, while Jamie served as their guide to this underwater universe. "Look," Sophia called, her voice bright with wonder. "There's a whole city in here." She was right. The large pool she'd discovered teemed with life anemones waving like underwater flowers, hermit crabs racing for new shells, tiny fish darting between miniature forests of seaweed. It was a complete ecosystem existing in a space no larger than a bathtub, as complex and organized as any human settlement. Aurora found herself crouching beside her daughter, genuinely fascinated by this hidden world she'd never taken time to notice before. When had she stopped seeing such things? When had her vision narrowed to spreadsheets and market projections and strategic 5-year plans? "Emma used to paint these," Noah said, settling beside them on the rocks. She'd spend hours here, trying to capture all the colors and movement. Said it was like trying to paint music. "I can see why," Aurora replied, watching a sea anemone pulse gently in the current. "It's alive in a way that makes you want to preserve it somehow." They spent the morning moving from pool to pool, the children's excitement infectious as they discovered new wonders in each miniature ecosystem. Aurora found her usual sense of time dissolving. She stopped checking her phone, stopped calculating how long each activity would take, stopped planning the next item on an agenda that suddenly seemed less important than the perfect starfish Lucas had found or the hermit crab race Sophia had organized. Lunch was sandwiches eaten on the beach. Simple food that tasted extraordinary in the salt air and sunshine. The children had moved seamlessly from exploration to construction, building an elaborate sand castle that incorporated elements of both lighthouse and tide pool architecture. Their collaboration was so natural that Aurora found herself wondering why she'd been so careful to limit her children's social interactions to other families from similar backgrounds. "Penny for your thoughts," Noah said, settling beside her on the driftwood log she'd chosen as her observation post. "I was thinking about choices," Aurora replied, surprising herself with her honesty. "About the things we think are protecting our children that might actually be limiting them." Noah followed her gaze to where the three children were engaged in serious discussion about the proper placement of a seaweed garden in their sand metropolis. "Emma used to say that the best gift we could give Jamie was confidence in his own judgment, that if we taught him to think for himself and trust his instincts, he'd be able to handle whatever the world threw at him. And if his instincts are wrong, then he learns from the mistake and develops better instincts," Noah replied with a shrug. "Same as the rest of us." The simplicity of the philosophy was both appealing and terrifying to Aurora, who'd built her entire parenting approach around preventing mistakes rather than learning from them. Her children's lives were carefully curated: the right schools, the right activities, the right friends from families who shared her values and expectations. But watching Sophia and Lucas blossom in this unstructured environment made her wonder what opportunities for growth she might have been inadvertently denying them. Her phone buzzed insistently in her pocket, the outside world asserting its claims on her attention. Aurora glanced at the screen and saw 17 missed calls from her assistant, 12 from various board members, and 43 unread emails marked as urgent. The familiar anxiety began to creep up her spine. She was needed, expected, depended upon by hundreds of employees and thousands of shareholders. But when she looked up from the device, she saw Noah watching her with understanding rather than judgment in his expression. "The world's still there," he said gently. "It'll keep spinning, whether you answer every crisis in real time or not. Easy to say when you're not responsible for other people's livelihoods." Aurora replied, but without the defensive edge the comment might have carried yesterday. "I'm responsible for keeping people safe on the water," Noah pointed out. "That's not nothing, but I've learned that being constantly available doesn't make me better at the job. It just makes me more tired and less focused when something actually important happens." Aurora looked at her phone again, then deliberately turned it face down. In the sand beside her, the action felt both liberating and terrifying, like stepping off a cliff and hoping someone had remembered to pack a parachute. "There," she said, the word carrying more weight than its simplicity suggested. "There," Noah agreed, and his smile told her he understood exactly what the gesture had cost her. The afternoon dissolved into the kind of timeless peace that Aurora had forgotten was possible. They walked the shoreline, collecting the shells and sea glass that the storm had deposited like gifts from the ocean's treasury. The children's energy seemed inexhaustible as they raced waves and built additional architectural marvels in the sand, their laughter carrying on the salt breeze like music dot as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades that had no names, Aurora found herself standing close enough to Noah to feel the warmth radiating from his body. They'd been watching the children's latest engineering project, a complex canal system designed to channel the incoming tide, when she became aware of the subtle shift in the space between them. "Aurora," Noah said quietly, her name carrying a weight it hadn't held before. She turned to look at him, really look at him, taking in the weathered kindness of his face, a gentle strength in his hands, the way his eyes reflected not just the ocean's blue, but something deeper and more constant. When he reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch was so gentle it made her breath catch. The kiss, when it came, felt both inevitable and surprising soft at first, tentative, then deeper, as Aurora felt 3 years of loneliness and careful control finally crack open. Noah tasted like salt air and possibilities, like coming home to a place she'd never known she was searching for. When they broke apart, the world looked different, somehow sharper, more vivid, full of potential that hadn't existed moments before. The children were still absorbed in their engineering project, unaware that the adult world had just shifted on its axis in the space of a heartbeat. "I should probably tell you," Aurora said softly. "I don't usually do things like this." "Like what?" Noah asked, though his smile suggested he knew exactly what she meant. "Kiss strangers on beaches. Extend business trips indefinitely. Let my children build sand castles with boys they met yesterday." "For what it's worth," Noah replied, his hand finding hers. "I don't usually invite strange women to stay in my house or take days off to show them tide pools." They stood there as the sun continued its ancient descent, hands linked, watching their children play at the edge of an ocean that had been bringing people together and pulling them apart for countless generations. Aurora felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the sense that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to be doing, without a single item on a to-do list or strategic objective in sight. Tomorrow would bring decisions about extending her stay, about returning to the responsibilities she'd temporarily set aside, about whether this interlude could become something more than a beautiful interruption in their carefully ordered lives. But right now, with Noah's hand warm in hers and her children's laughter echoing across the water, tomorrow felt both very far away and full of promise. The company merger documents arrived by courier 3 days later, delivered to Noah's address with the efficiency that marked everything in Aurora's corporate world. She'd extended her stay under the pretense of ensuring her children had fully recovered from their ordeal. But the truth was more complicated and more terrifying than she was ready to admit even to herself. Aurora found the thick manila envelope waiting on the kitchen counter when she returned from the morning school run, a ritual that had somehow become part of her routine with surprising ease. Walking Jamie, Sophia, and Lucas to the bus stop, chatting with other parents about homework and upcoming field trips, waving goodbye as the yellow bus disappeared around the corner. It was a life so different from her usual morning conference calls and strategic planning sessions that it felt like wearing someone else's clothes. "Important?" Noah asked, nodding toward the envelope as he poured fresh coffee into the mug that had somehow become hers over the past few days. "Probably," Aurora replied, but made no move to open it. Instead, she found herself studying the return address her own company's legal department, located in a Manhattan tower that suddenly seemed as distant as the moon. She'd been lying to everyone, she realized. Her assistant believed she was conducting due diligence on a potential acquisition target. Her board of directors thought she was networking with European partners. Even her children assumed this extended beach vacation was a spontaneous treat, rather than what it actually was, a complete abdication of the responsibilities that defined her adult life. The lies were getting more elaborate as the pressure from her corporate world intensified. Emergency board meetings were being postponed, crucial decisions delayed, million-dollar opportunities potentially slipping away while she helped with homework and learned to make Noah's grandmother's recipe for clam chowder. You know you can tell me if something's wrong, Noah said gently, and Aurora realized her internal struggle must be showing on her face. Before she could respond, her phone rang with the insistent urgency she'd learned to associate with genuine crises. This time it was her assistant, and Aurora knew she couldn't ignore the call any longer. "I have to take this," she said apologetically, stepping out onto the back porch where Noah's small garden was beginning to show the colors of autumn. "Aurora, thank God." Marcus's voice carried relief and barely controlled panic in equal measure. "The Yamamoto deal is falling apart. They want to meet tomorrow in person, and the Tokyo team is refusing to proceed without your direct involvement. The board is asking questions I can't answer, and—" "Slow down," Aurora interrupted, though her own heart rate was accelerating as the familiar pressure reasserted itself. What exactly happened with Yamamoto? As Marcus explained the crisis cultural miscommunications, technical specifications that had been lost in translation, a competitor offering terms that their legal team wasn't sure they could match, Aurora felt the peaceful bubble she'd been living in begin to deflate. This was real. This was her life, her responsibility, her company's future hanging in the balance while she played house in a small coastal town. "I'll catch the next flight," she heard herself saying, the words automatic even as something inside her rebelled against them. "Actually, that's the other problem," Marcus continued. "Your private jet is grounded for maintenance, and commercial flights are booked solid due to that airline strike. Even if we could get you on something, you wouldn't make it in time for the meeting." Aurora closed her eyes, calculating time zones and flight schedules with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd built a career on making impossible logistics work. But for once, the math didn't add up in her favor. She was trapped by circumstances beyond her control, forced to delegate responsibilities she'd never trusted to anyone else. Set up a video conference, she decided. Full presentation, real time. Document sharing, whatever technology we need to make it work. And Marcus, don't mention that I'm not in the office. When she ended the call, Noah was standing in the doorway with 2 mugs of tea, his expression carefully neutral in the way that suggested he'd heard enough to understand the situation. "Crisis?" he asked, offering her one of the mugs. "Several, apparently," Aurora replied, accepting the tea and grateful for its warmth against her suddenly cold hands. "I've been kidding myself, thinking I could just disappear from my real life without consequences." "Maybe the question isn't whether there are consequences," Noah said thoughtfully. "Maybe it's whether those consequences are worth avoiding the life you actually want to live." The comment hit closer to home than Aurora was comfortable with. What did she want? For 20 years, she'd defined herself by what she could achieve, what she could build, what problems she could solve. But sitting in Noah's garden, surrounded by the simple beauty of tomatoes, heavy on the vine, and late-blooming roses that Emma had planted years ago, Aurora found herself wondering when achievement had stopped feeling like enough. The video conference that afternoon was a masterclass in corporate diplomacy conducted from Noah's dining room table while the children did homework in the kitchen. Aurora had transformed herself back into the executive they expected: sleek blazer, perfect makeup, the kind of confidence that made people assume she was calling from a Manhattan boardroom rather than a fisherman's cottage. The meeting went, well, better than she'd dared to hope. The Tokyo team responded to her direct involvement with the respect she'd earned over decades of successful negotiations, and by the end of the 2-hour session, they'd salvaged not just the deal but improved it in ways that would benefit both companies. But when she closed her laptop and peeled off the blazer she'd worn only from the waist up, Aurora felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the complex negotiations she'd just navigated. She'd been performing again, wearing the persona that had made her successful, but that felt increasingly like a costume that no longer fit properly. "How'd it go?" Noah asked, appearing with a cup of coffee that was exactly the temperature and sweetness she preferred. somehow knowing she'd need the caffeine boost after hours of high-stakes diplomacy. "Fine. Good, actually," Aurora replied, but her voice carried a flatness that contradicted the positive words. Noah settled into the chair across from her, his presence steady and comforting in contrast to the aggressive energy that had filled the room during her conference call. "You don't sound like someone who just saved a major deal." "I'm just tired," Aurora said, and found herself adding, "It used to feel different. The work, I mean. It used to feel like I was building something important, solving problems that mattered. Now it just feels like—" She trailed off, not sure how to articulate the growing emptiness that success had somehow created rather than filled. "Like you're maintaining a machine rather than creating something meaningful?" Noah suggested, and Aurora looked at him with surprise. "Exactly. How did you?" "I felt the same way about patrol work after Emma died," Noah admitted. "Going through the motions, doing the job well enough, but not feeling connected to why it mattered. It wasn't until Jamie started asking about what I did all day that I remembered why I'd chosen this work in the first place." Aurora thought about her own children, who'd stopped asking about her work years ago except to complain when it kept her away from school events or family dinners. When had their curiosity about her professional life faded into resigned acceptance of her frequent absence? What changed? She asked. I started seeing it differently. Less about following protocols and more about the people I was keeping safe. Your work probably matters to more people than you realize. You just might not be thinking about it in the right way. Before Aurora could respond, the sound of children's voices interrupted their conversation. Sophia, Lucas, and Jamie burst through the kitchen door with the explosive energy that marked the end of a school day, their backpacks hitting the floor with identical thuds as they began the rapid-fire narrative of their daily adventures. "Mrs. Peterson said our presentation about tide pools was the best in the whole class," Sophia announced proudly. "And she wants to know if we can bring in some real specimens for the science fair. I got picked to read my story out loud tomorrow," Lucas added, his usual shyness forgotten in his excitement. "It's about a lighthouse keeper who saves ships during storms." Jamie, not to be outdone, produced a math test with a gold star sticker and a smiley face that took up half the margin. "Dad, look. I got all the word problems right, even the hard ones about boats and distances." Aurora watched this domestic explosion with fascination and growing warmth. Her children had been thriving in ways she hadn't seen in years, more confident, more willing to take creative risks, more collaborative in their approach to challenges. The structure she'd thought they needed had perhaps been limiting them in ways she was only now beginning to understand. "That's wonderful," she said, meaning it completely. "I'm so proud of all of you." As the children settled in for homework time, their natural cooperation making even math worksheets seem like collaborative adventures, Aurora found herself thinking about the patterns that had emerged over their week in Millfield Cove, the rhythm of shared meals, the way decisions got made. Through discussion rather than decree, the assumption that everyone's contribution mattered regardless of age or experience. It was. She realized how she'd always imagined family life should work, but had never quite managed to achieve in their carefully scheduled existence. There had always been too many commitments, too many people depending on her professional attention, too many crises that couldn't wait for bedtime stories or homework help. "I need to ask you something," she said to Noah as they began the dinner, preparation that had become their evening ritual. "And I need you to be honest with me." Noah looked up from the vegetables he was chopping, his expression attentive and slightly concerned. "Do you think I'm a good mother?" The question surprised them both, Aurora, because she'd never asked it before. Noah, because of its unexpected vulnerability. He set down his knife and turned to face her fully, considering his response with the care the question deserved. "I think you're a mother who loves her children completely," he said finally. "I think you've made choices about how to parent them based on what you believed was best for their future. And I think you're brave enough to question those choices when you see evidence that there might be better ways. It wasn't exactly the reassurance Aurora had been seeking, but it was honest in a way that felt more valuable than comfort. She thought about the mothers she knew in her professional and social circles, women who, like her, employed nannies and housekeepers and tutors to handle the daily details of child-rearing while they focused on careers that would provide their families with security and opportunities. But watching Sophia help Lucas with his reading homework while Jamie patiently explained the difference between addition and multiplication strategies, Aurora wondered whether her children might have been hungry for something that couldn't be purchased or delegated. The simple presence of a parent who is fully available, fully engaged, fully theirs. Her phone buzzed again, another crisis demanding immediate attention. This time, Aurora looked at the screen, took a deep breath, and turned the device off completely. "The world will have to spin without me for one evening," she said, echoing Noah's words from their first day together. As they prepared dinner together, a simple meal made extraordinary by the laughter and conversation that seasoned it. Aurora felt something loosening in her chest. For the first time in years, she was exactly where she wanted to be, doing exactly what felt important, with people who seemed to value her presence more than her productivity. The merger documents remained unopened on the counter, their urgency somehow diminished by the more immediate importance of helping with homework, listening to school stories, and participating in the kind of ordinary evening that she was beginning to understand might be the most extraordinary thing of all. Aurora discovered Emma's driftwood journal on a rainy Thursday morning while helping Noah sort through boxes in the attic. What had started as a search for extra winter blankets had turned into an inadvertent archaeology of his marriage, each box revealing layers of a life shared, and then suddenly halted. "I should probably go through all this," Noah said apologetically, lifting a cardboard box marked Emma's art supplies in his careful handwriting. "I keep meaning to, but ... But it's hard," Aurora finished, understanding completely. She'd avoided cleaning out her father's study for 2 years after his death, unable to face the finality that sorting and donating would represent. The journal was tucked beneath tubes of dried paint and worn brushes, wrapped in a piece of sea glass, green silk that had protected it from the dampness that plagued all old houses near the ocean. Aurora lifted it carefully, immediately recognizing it as something precious, not because of any obvious value, but because of the way it seemed to radiate the love and attention that had gone into its creation. The cover was made from a piece of driftwood that had been sanded smooth and fitted with leather binding. Emma's initials were carved into the wood in flowing script. E.M.C. Emma Marie Calder. Inside, the pages held a mixture of sketches, pressed flowers, fabric samples, and handwritten notes in the flowing cursive of someone who'd learned to write before computers made penmanship obsolete. "She started this right after we moved here," Noah explained, settling beside Aurora on the dusty attic floor. "Said she wanted to capture everything about this place that made her fall in love with it. The way the light changed with the seasons, the plants that grew wild along the shore, the faces of people who'd lived here their whole lives." Aurora turned the pages carefully, each one revealing Emma's artistic vision and deep connection to Millfield Cove. There were watercolor studies of the harbor at different times of day, pressed samples of beach grass and sea lavender, fabric swatches in shades that captured the exact color of fog rolling in from the Atlantic. But it was a sketch. Near the middle of the journal that made Aurora's breath catch in her throat. The drawing was simple but elegant, a mathematical representation of fluid dynamics that showed how ocean currents could be predicted and modeled. Below it, in Emma's careful handwriting, were notes about how the patterns of water movement reminded her of other natural systems, the branching of tree roots, the formation of river deltas, the way crowds moved through urban spaces. Aurora stared at the sketch with growing disbelief and mounting horror. She knew this drawing. not just conceptually, but specifically, exactly, in every line and curve and mathematical notation. She'd seen it before, years ago, when she was a struggling graduate student spending her spring break walking beaches and trying to find inspiration for her thesis on predictive algorithms. The journal had been half buried in sand, on a beach in Maine, water damaged and abandoned, with no identifying information beyond the initials EMC carved into its driftwood cover. Aurora had found it during a morning run, had sat on the rocks, flipping through pages of beautiful sketches and thoughtful observations, had been struck by the mathematical elegance of this particular drawing. She'd photographed the sketch, meaning to try to find its owner, but graduate school had consumed her attention. And then came the breakthrough moment, when the pattern in Emma's drawing had suddenly illuminated the solution to a problem Aurora had been wrestling with for months. The algorithm that had become the foundation of her company, the innovation that had made her billions, the breakthrough that had defined her entire career, had all started with this sketch in this journal by this woman, whose husband she was now falling in love with. "Aurora?" Noah's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." In a way, she had. She was holding the ghost of her own moral foundation, the evidence that her greatest achievement had been built on someone else's inspiration. Not stolen. Exactly, the journal had been abandoned, and Aurora had transformed the basic concept into something far more complex and commercially viable. But she'd never tried to find the original artist, never. Wondered about the person who'd first seen the mathematical beauty in ocean currents and tide patterns. Where did she get the idea for this? Aurora asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Noah looked at the sketch, his expression growing soft with memory. Emma was fascinated by patterns. She used to say that everything in nature was connected by mathematical relationships we just hadn't learned to see yet. This one came from watching the harbor during a storm. She saw how the water moved in predictable ways, despite looking completely chaotic. Aurora felt sick. Not just guilt, but a deeper horror at the cosmic coincidence that had brought her here, to this place, to this man, carrying the weight of a secret that could destroy whatever was growing between them. How could she tell Noah that her fortune was built on his dead wife's ideas? How could she explain that she'd profited for years from Emma's uncredited brilliance? "I need some air," she said abruptly, closing the journal and setting it aside with hands that trembled slightly. Noah followed her down from the attic, his concern evident in the way he stayed close without crowding her. Aurora moved through the house like a sleepwalker, past the walls covered with Emma's paintings, past the kitchen where they'd shared so many comfortable meals, past the living room where their children had built pillow forts and told stories. Outside, the October air was sharp with the promise of winter, and Aurora wrapped her arms around herself as she stood on the porch where she'd first kissed Noah just days before. Everything looked the same: the harbor, the lighthouse, the weathered docks where lobstermen prepared their boats for another day's work. But the world had fundamentally shifted, revealing moral complexities she'd never imagined. "Talk to me," Noah said gently, settling beside her on the porch swing that Emma had convinced him to install during their first spring in the house. Aurora wanted to tell him everything. The words were there, waiting to spill out the story of finding the journal, the breakthrough that had changed her life, the 20 years of success built on a foundation she'd never questioned till this moment. But alongside the urge for confession was terror. Terror that Noah would see her as a thief, that their growing love would be poisoned by the revelation that she'd profited from his wife's uncredited genius. "It's complicated," she said finally, the understatement of the century. "Most important." "Things are," Noah replied, his hand finding hers on the swing's armrest. "Doesn't mean they're not worth figuring out." Aurora looked at him, this good man who'd saved her children and opened his home and his heart to strangers, who created beautiful things with his hands and raised his son with patience and wisdom, who'd shown her what love could look like when It wasn't complicated by power dynamics and business considerations. She was going to lose him. As soon as he learned the truth about how her success was connected to Emma's uncredited work, she was going to lose this chance at happiness she'd never even known she was looking for. Her phone buzzed insistently in her pocket, reality asserting its claims on her attention, even in this moment of crisis. Aurora ignored it, but the device continued its urgent summons call after call, message after message, the corporate world demanding her immediate return to the responsibilities she'd been neglecting. "I should probably get that," she said, though every instinct screamed against re-engaging with the professional obligations that suddenly felt trivial compared to the moral earthquake she was experiencing. The call was from Marcus, and his voice carried a level of panic that cut through Aurora's emotional fog. "Aurora, thank God, we have a situation. Someone leaked news about your extended absence, and the stock price is in free fall. The board is calling an emergency meeting, and there are rumors about a hostile takeover attempt. You need to get back here immediately." Aurora closed her eyes, feeling the walls of her carefully constructed life closing in from multiple directions. Her company was in crisis. Her relationship with Noah was built on a foundation that would crumble as soon as he learned the truth. And her children were about to be yanked away from the first real happiness they'd experienced in years. "How long do I have?" she asked. "Hours, not days," Marcus replied grimly. "The board meeting is scheduled for tomorrow morning. If you're not there to reassure the major shareholders personally, we could lose control of the company entirely." Aurora looked through the kitchen window where she could see Sophia, Lucas, and Jamie working on a school project together, there. Heads bent over poster board as they collaborated on what looked like a presentation about local marine life. They were happy here, more than happy. They were thriving in ways that her carefully curated life had never allowed. But her company employed 3,000 people, whose livelihoods depended on her leadership. Her innovations had spawned entire industries, and her absence was creating ripple effects that extended far beyond her personal situation. She had responsibilities that couldn't be abandoned, no matter how much she wanted to stay in this bubble of domestic contentment. "I'll catch the next flight," she heard herself saying, the words feeling like a betrayal, even as she spoke them. When she ended the call, Noah was watching her with an expression that suggested he'd heard enough to understand the general situation, if not the specific details. "You have to go," he said, and it wasn't a question. "I have to go," Aurora confirmed, hating the truth of it. They sat in silence for a moment, both understanding that this departure would be different from the casual postponements that had extended her stay for nearly 2 weeks. This time, she would be returning to a crisis that would consume all her attention, leaving no room for morning phone calls, or evening video chats, or weekend visits. "What about us?" Noah asked quietly. Aurora felt her heart break a little at the simple question. What about them, indeed? How could she explain that their relationship was built on a lie she'd only just discovered? How could she tell him that loving him felt like a betrayal of the woman whose ideas had made Aurora's success possible? "I don't know," she whispered, the honesty cutting deeper than any lie could have. Inside the house, their children continued working on their project, unaware that the adults' world was falling apart around them. Aurora watched them through the window and realized that whatever happened between her and Noah, she owed her children the truth about why their perfect vacation was about to end. She owed Noah an explanation about why she was pulling away just when their connection had deepened into something that felt like forever. But first, she had to figure out how to live with the knowledge that her greatest professional achievement was inextricably linked to the greatest personal loss of the man she was falling in love with. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of irony that bordered on the cruel. The plane tickets arrived by courier that evening, first-class seats on the red-eye flight to New York that would get Aurora back to the city in time for the emergency board meeting. She stared at the boarding passes as if they were divorce papers, These thin pieces of cardboard that would sever her connection to the life she'd been building in Millfield Cove. Marcus had handled the logistics with his usual efficiency: car service to Boston, priority boarding, a suite reserved at the hotel where the board meeting would take place. Everything arranged to minimize travel time and maximize her ability to project the kind of unshakable confidence that would reassure nervous shareholders and hostile competitors alike. But Aurora felt anything but confident as she sat at Noah's kitchen table, surrounded by the domestic warmth that had become her refuge, knowing she was about to abandon it for the sterile corporate battlefield where she'd built her reputation. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was rushing back to save a company built on algorithms inspired by sketches made by the woman whose husband she was falling in love with. "We have to tell them," Noah said quietly, nodding toward the living room, where their children were engaged in what had become their nightly ritual, a collaborative story session where each child contributed chapters to an ongoing adventure saga. Aurora's heart clenched at the word "we." Even in this moment of impending separation, Noah was including her, treating their blended family unit as something real and worth protecting. It made what she had to do even more painful. "I know," she replied, though the prospect of seeing disappointment in her children's eyes felt almost unbearable. "I just don't know how to explain that this isn't what I wanted." "Maybe start with that," Noah suggested. "Kids understand wanting things you can't have. They might understand better than you think." Aurora looked at the plane tickets again, then at the merger documents that still sat unopened on the counter. In 12 hours, she would be back in Manhattan, fielding crisis calls and making decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions in shareholder value. The woman who had learned to flip pancakes and help with homework would disappear, replaced by the executive persona that had defined her for so long. She'd forgotten it was supposed to be just one part of who she was. "There's something else," she said, the words feeling like they were being dragged from some deep place she tried to keep sealed. "Something I need to tell you before I go." Noah's expression grew more serious, reading the gravity in her tone. "About Emma's journal?" Aurora's head snapped up in surprise. "You know, I saw your face when you found that sketch," Noah said gently. "I've never seen anyone look at a piece of paper like it was going to explode. And then you started asking questions about where Emma got her ideas, like the answers mattered more than they should to someone who just met her through her artwork." Aurora felt tears prick at her eyes. Even now, when she was preparing to confess something that could destroy whatever trust existed between them, Noah was approaching her with the same patient understanding he showed his son during difficult conversations. 20 years ago, I found that journal washed up on a beach in Maine," Aurora began, the words coming slowly but steadily. "I was a graduate student, struggling with my thesis, looking for inspiration. The journal was water damaged, partially buried in sand. There was no way to identify who it belonged to." Noah's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a subtle withdrawal that Aurora felt like a physical blow. "I photographed some of the sketches, including that one about fluid dynamics. I meant to try to find the owner, but graduate school was consuming my life, and then—" She took a shaky breath. "That sketch became the foundation for my breakthrough algorithm. The pattern Emma saw in the ocean currents. It was the key to everything I built afterward." The silence that followed felt endless. Aurora could hear the children's voices from the living room, Jamie's animated narration of some pirate adventure punctuated by Sophia and Lucas's delighted interruptions. Normal sounds of family life continuing while the adult world cracked apart in the kitchen. "You built your company on Emma's ideas," Noah said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "I transformed her concept into something much more complex," Aurora said quickly, then stopped herself. That sounded like rationalization, like she was trying to minimize what she'd done. "But yes, the initial inspiration, the mathematical insight that made everything possible, that was hers. Noah stood up from the table and walked to the window that looked out over the harbor. Aurora could see his reflection in the glass, the way his shoulders had straightened as if he was preparing to bear a weight he hadn't expected. "Did you know?" he asked without turning around. "When you came here, did you know who I was?" "No," Aurora said immediately. "I had no idea. The journal just had the initials EMC carved into the cover. There was no way for me to know that Emma lived here, that you existed, that I would end up falling in love with the husband of the woman whose work made my career possible." The confession of love hung in the air between them. The first time either of them had spoken the word aloud, despite the growing certainty of what was developing between them. But instead of the joy such a declaration should have brought, it felt like another weight added to an already impossible situation. "Falling in love," Noah repeated softly, still facing the window. "Yes," Aurora whispered. "Which makes this so much worse. I should tell you that I'm planning to give me half your fortune?" Noah interrupted, turning to face her with an expression that was equal parts sad and gentle. "To try to pay for what you think you took?" Aurora stared at him, in shock. "How did you?" "Because I know you," Noah said, returning to his chair at the table. "I've watched you with our kids, seen how you handle guilt and responsibility. You're planning to offer me money, because that's how you solve problems in your world." "But Aurora, I don't want your money." "But it's not fair," Aurora protested, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "I built a billion-dollar company on Emma's uncredited work. I've been profiting for 20 years from her ideas, while you've been here alone, raising your son, struggling to what?" Noah asked quietly. "To honor her memory? To build something meaningful from the grief? You think Emma would want me to be angry about this?" Aurora didn't know how to respond. She'd expected fury, accusations, demands for justice. She'd prepared herself for Noah to see her as a thief, to order her out of his house and his life. She hadn't prepared for this quiet acceptance, this willingness to see complexity where she'd expected only condemnation. She would want to know that her ideas mattered, Noah continued, that they helped someone build something important, even if she never got credit for it. Emma cared about impact, not recognition. She painted because she loved beauty, not because she wanted to be famous. "That doesn't make what I did right," Aurora said. "No," Noah agreed. "But it doesn't make you a villain either. You were a struggling student who found inspiration in a damaged journal and turned it into something that's probably helped more people than either of us can count. Context matters, Aurora. Intent matters." Before Aurora could respond, her phone rang again, Marcus, with another update about the corporate crisis that was pulling her back to New York. She let it go to voicemail, but the sound was a reminder that time was running out, that decisions made in crisis rarely allowed for the careful consideration this situation deserved. "I have to go," she said, the words feeling like a betrayal, even though they were true. "I know," Noah replied. "But this conversation isn't over. Whatever this is between us, it's not over." Aurora wanted to believe him, wanted to think that love could survive the complicated truths that connected them. But as she looked at the plane tickets that would take her back to her old life, she felt the weight of all the lies she'd told to stay here, all the responsibilities she'd abandoned, all the people depending on her to be the leader they'd trusted with their futures. The children took the news of her departure with the resilience that children showed when facing disappointments that were too large to fully understand. There were tears, certainly, and promises to call every day, and plans for visits that Aurora wasn't sure she'd be able to keep once the demands of her corporate life reasserted their claims on her time. "Will you come back?" Lucas asked as she tucked him into the bed that had become his during their extended stay. "I hope so," Aurora replied, meaning it with every fiber of her being, while knowing that hope and reality were often very different. Things. Sophia, always more perceptive than her age should have allowed, studied Aurora's face with serious eyes. "You don't look happy about going home," she observed. "Sometimes we have to do things that don't make us happy," Aurora explained, the lesson feeling inadequate even as she spoke it. "But why?" Sophia pressed. "If being here makes you happy, and being there makes you sad, why not just stay here?" It was the question Aurora had been asking herself for days. The simple logic that her daughter's uncomplicated worldview made seem so obvious. Why not just stay? Why not choose happiness over obligation, love over profit, family over corporate? Success? But adult life was more complex than an 8-year-old's understanding could encompass. Aurora had responsibilities to thousands of employees, commitments to shareholders who trusted her with their investments, obligations that couldn't be abandoned simply because she'd found something better. Jamie's goodbye was the hardest. This boy who'd welcomed her children as siblings and treated her as an extension of the family he'd been missing. "You'll take care of my dad, right?" he asked with the earnest concern of a child who'd learned too young that people you loved could disappear without warning. "Your dad is very good at taking care of himself," Aurora replied, though she understood what Jamie was really asking. Would she abandon Noah the way death had taken his mother? Would she leave behind another person who'd learned to depend on her presence? Her conversation with Noah before leaving was conducted in the kitchen where they'd shared so many meals, surrounded by the domestic artifacts of the life they'd been building together. The coffee maker that had learned her preferences, the refrigerator covered with the children's artwork, the wooden cutting board Noah had made and Emma had used, and Aurora had come to think of as partly hers. "I'm going to tell them," Aurora said suddenly, the decision crystallizing as she spoke. "The board, the shareholders, everyone. I'm going to tell them the truth about where the algorithm came from." Noah looked surprised. "Aurora, you don't need to." "Yes, I do," she interrupted. "I've built my entire career on Emma's uncredited work. I can't keep pretending it was entirely my innovation. Even if it costs me everything, I have to make it right." "And if it destroys your company?" Aurora thought about the thousands of employees who depended on her leadership, the innovations her company had brought to market, the positive impact her work had generated across multiple industries. Was her need for moral clarity worth potentially destroying all of that? "Then I'll find another way to honor Emma's contribution," she said finally. "But I can't live with this secret anymore. And I can't build a relationship with you on a foundation of lies." As the car service pulled into Noah's driveway to take her to the airport, Aurora felt like she was being split in half. Part of her belonged here, in this house with these people who'd become her family. But another part belonged to the corporate world that had shaped her adult identity, to the responsibilities and obligations that couldn't be abandoned without consequences that extended far beyond her personal happiness. The goodbye kiss she shared with Noah on his front porch tasted like tears and promises neither of them was sure they could keep. As the car pulled away, Aurora watched through the rear window until the house disappeared around a curve in the road, taking with it the life she'd never known she wanted until it was time to leave it behind. Tomorrow, she would face her board of directors and tell them a truth that could destroy everything she'd built. Tonight, as the plane carried her back toward the Manhattan skyline that had once represented all her ambitions, Aurora stared out at the darkness and wondered if doing the right thing was worth losing the only happiness she'd ever found. The boardroom on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower had been designed to intimidate, with its floor-to-ceiling windows offering commanding views of Manhattan and its massive table that could seat 20, but somehow made everyone feel small. Aurora had presided over hundreds of meetings in this room, had negotiated deals worth billions while sitting in the leather chair at its head, had delivered presentations that moved markets and shaped industries, but she'd never sat in this room. While wearing Emma's wedding ring, she'd slipped it onto her right hand during the taxi ride from the airport, the simple gold band that Noah had pressed into her palm during their final moments together. "She would want you to have this," he'd said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "For courage when you need it most." Now, as Aurora faced the assembled board of directors, 12 of the most powerful and influential business leaders in America, she could feel the ring's weight like a talisman, a reminder of why she was about to risk everything she'd spent 2 decades building. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying the authority that had made her a legend in the tech industry. "I know you're expecting me to address the recent market volatility and the rumors about my extended absence. But before we discuss the company's immediate future, I need to tell you something about its past." The room was silent except for the subtle hum of climate control and the distant sound of traffic 42 floors below. Aurora could see Marcus in the corner, his face tight with confusion and growing concern. She'd refused to tell him what she planned to say, had insisted on handling this meeting without the carefully crafted talking points and strategic messaging that usually preceded any public statement. She opened her laptop and projected Emma's sketch onto the large screen that dominated one wall of the boardroom. The elegant lines and mathematical notations looked strange in this sterile corporate environment, like poetry written in a language of numbers and equations. "This drawing was made by a woman named Emma Marie Calder," Aurora continued, watching as confusion rippled across the faces of board members who'd expected to discuss quarterly projections and competitive positioning. "She was an artist who lived in a small coastal town in Maine. She died 3 years ago of cancer, leaving behind a husband and a young son." Board member Catherine Mills, the former CEO of a Fortune 500 company who'd never been known for her patience with tangential discussions, leaned forward in her chair. "Aurora, with all due respect, what does this have to do with our current crisis?" "Everything," Aurora replied simply. "Because this woman's observation about the mathematical patterns underlying ocean currents became the foundation for the algorithm that built our company." The silence that followed was different from the polite attention she'd commanded moments before. This was the silence of people trying to process information that didn't fit their understanding of reality, the collective intake of breath that preceded either acclaim or catastrophe. "I found Emma's journal 20 years ago on a beach in Maine," Aurora continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was confessing. "It was water-damaged, abandoned, with no way to identify its owner. I photographed several of the sketches, including this one, meaning to try to find the artist and return it." She could see understanding beginning to dawn in some faces, calculation in others. These were people who'd built careers on reading between lines, on understanding the implications of information that others might miss. But graduate school consumed my attention, and then came the breakthrough moment when Emma's insight about fluid dynamics provided the key to the predictive modeling problem I'd been struggling with for months. The algorithm that made our company possible, that generated billions in revenue and revolutionized 3 separate industries. It started with this woman's uncredited observation about how water moves. Catherine Mills was the first to speak, her voice carefully controlled. "Are you telling us that our entire intellectual property foundation is built on stolen ideas?" "I'm telling you that it's built on inspiration I found in a damaged journal belonging to a woman who received no credit and whose family has received no benefit from innovations that changed the world," Aurora replied. "Whether that constitutes theft is a question for lawyers and ethicists, but it's not a question I can continue to ignore." The explosion of voices that followed was predictable urgent consultations between board members, whispered conversations about legal liability, sharp questions about Aurora's mental state and judgment. But through the chaos, Aurora found herself thinking about the morning she'd left Millfield Cove, about Jamie asking if she would take care of his father, about the weight of responsibility that came not just from corporate obligations, but from human connections. "The financial implications alone," began Robert Chun, the board's most senior member and Aurora's longtime mentor. Are significant, Aurora agreed, cutting him off. Which is why I'm proposing to establish the Emma Calder Foundation, funded by my personal holdings, to support innovative research in mathematical modeling and to provide educational opportunities for young artists and scientists. You're talking about giving away a fortune, Catherine observed, her tone suggesting she thought Aurora had lost her mind entirely. I'm talking about honoring the source of that fortune, Aurora corrected, and about building something that Emma would have been proud to see grow from her work. The questions came rapidly after that about legal exposure, about competitive advantage, about what this revelation would mean for ongoing projects and future development. Aurora answered them all with the same steady honesty that had characterized her confession, refusing to minimize the complexity of the situation while insisting on the moral necessity of acknowledgement. But it was Marcus who asked the question that went to the heart of everything. What about the company? What about the 3,000 people who depend on our success for their livelihoods? Aurora looked around the room at faces that represented decades of professional relationships, billions in shareholder value, innovations that had genuinely improved the world despite their morally complicated origins. These weren't evil people, they were individuals who trusted her leadership and who now faced the possibility that her personal moral crisis might destroy everything they'd built together. The company will survive, she said, though she wasn't entirely certain of that claim. Our innovations are real, our impact is measurable, and our team's expertise doesn't disappear because we acknowledge that our foundational insight came from an uncredited source. But we have to be honest about our history if we want to build an ethical future. I've made my decision, she announced during a brief lull in the debate. I'm going to make this information public, regardless of what the board decides to do about it. Aurora, you can't, Robert began. I can and I will, she interrupted, surprising herself with the calm certainty in her voice. This secret has poisoned every success I've achieved for the past 2 decades. I won't carry it anymore, and I won't ask any of you to carry it either. She stood up from the table, Emma's ring catching the light from the massive windows that overlooked a city where millions of people made countless moral compromises every day in service of careers and ambitions that suddenly seemed smaller than they'd once appeared. I'm returning to Maine tonight, Aurora announced, the decision crystallizing as she spoke. I'm going to tell Noah Calder, Emma's husband, what I've told you, and then I'm going to find a way to make this right, regardless of what it costs me personally or professionally. Aurora arrived back in Millfield Cove at sunset, the rental car's headlights cutting through the gathering dusk as she drove the familiar route to Noah's house. The town looked exactly the same as it had when she'd left 36 hours earlier, but everything felt different, now sharper, more precious, weighted with the possibility that this might be her last time seeing these weathered docks and salt-stained buildings. The truth letter she'd written during the flight sat folded in her jacket pocket, 3 pages of careful handwriting that explained everything: the journal, the algorithm, the 20 years of success built on Emma's uncredited insight. She'd decided that Noah deserved to hear the whole story in her own words, without the filter of news reports or corporate press releases that would inevitably follow her boardroom confession. But as she pulled into his driveway, Aurora's courage wavered. Through the kitchen window, she could see the warm glow of domestic life, Noah helping, Jamie with homework, while Sophia and Lucas worked on what looked like another collaborative art project. They'd built a routine in her absence, these 4 people who'd become her family, and she was about to shatter it with revelations that might make forgiveness impossible. Noah must have heard the car, because he appeared on the front porch before. Aurora had even turned off the engine. The sight of him, tall and solid, and reassuringly familiar, made her heart clench with the possibility of loss. Whatever happened in the next hour would determine whether she could keep this man in this life or whether moral honesty would cost her everything that had come to matter most. "You came back," he said simply, and Aurora couldn't tell from his tone whether he was surprised, relieved, or simply stating a fact. "I told them," she replied, stepping out of the car, but not yet approaching the porch. "The board, the shareholders, everyone. About Emma's journal, about the algorithm, about everything." Noah's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture, a subtle straightening that suggested he was preparing for whatever came next. And I probably destroyed my company," Aurora admitted, finally walking toward him. "The stock price is already dropping, the media is circling, and half the board thinks I've lost my mind." "Have you?" Noah asked, but there was gentleness in the question rather than judgment. "Maybe," Aurora said, reaching the bottom of the porch steps. "I walked away from the most important board meeting of my career to come back here and tell you something I should have told you days ago." She pulled the letter from her pocket, the pages slightly wrinkled from nervous handling during the flight. "I wrote this all down, the whole story, everything I should have said before I let myself fall in love with you. But I need to tell you first, before you read it." Noah descended the porch steps, moving close enough that Aurora could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the tension around his mouth that suggested he'd spent the past day and a half wrestling with demons of his own. "I found Emma's journal 20 years ago on a beach in Maine," Aurora began, the words coming in a rush now that the moment of truth had arrived. "It was damaged, abandoned, no way to identify the owner. I photographed some of the sketches, including the one about fluid dynamics that became the foundation for my algorithm. I built a billion-dollar company on your wife's uncredited ideas, and I didn't even know her name until I fell in love with you." The silence that followed felt endless. Aurora could hear the sound of waves against the harbor rocks, the distant call of seagulls settling for the night, the ordinary sounds of a coastal evening that continued regardless of the human drama playing out on this particular porch. "I know," Noah said quietly. Aurora's head snapped up in shock. "You know?" "I've known since the day after you left," Noah replied, his voice steady, but weighted with something Aurora couldn't identify. "Mrs. Henderson's grandson works for a tech magazine. He recognized your name, did some research, sent her an article about your company's breakthrough algorithm. She brought it to me thinking I might find it interesting." Aurora felt the world tilt slightly, as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted without warning. "You've known for 2 days?" "I've known for 2 days," Noah confirmed. "And I've spent those 2 days trying to figure out what it means for us, for Emma's memory, for the life we started building together." "What did you decide?" Aurora whispered, afraid of the answer, but needing to hear it. Noah reached for the letter in her hands, unfolding it carefully as if it contained something precious rather than potentially destructive. He read in silence while Aurora stood frozen. On his front steps, watching his face for any clue about his reaction to her written confession. "You offered to give me half your fortune," he said finally, looking up from the pages. "It seemed like the right thing to do," Aurora replied. "I profited from Emma's work. You should benefit from that success. And you think money is what I want from you?" Noah asked, but there was more curiosity than accusation in his tone. "I don't know what you want from me," Aurora admitted. "I don't know if you can forgive me for building my career on your wife's ideas. I don't know if you can trust me after I kept this secret. I don't even know if I deserve forgiveness." Noah folded the letter and slipped it into his own pocket, then reached for Aurora's hands. His touch was warm and steady, exactly as it had been during their first kiss on the beach, but now it carried the weight of everything they'd learned about each other in the days since. "Do you know what Emma would say about all this?" he asked. Aurora shook her head, not trusting her voice. "She'd say that the universe doesn't believe in coincidences," Noah continued. "She'd say that you were meant to find that journal, meant to build something important from her ideas, meant to end up here with me and our children, because that's how the world works when you're paying attention. But I didn't give her credit. No, Noah interrupted gently. You didn't. And that was wrong. But Aurora, you were a struggling graduate student who found inspiration in a damaged journal with no identifying information. You turned that inspiration into innovations that have probably helped more people than Emma ever imagined possible. Context matters. Intent matters. Aurora felt tears beginning to blur her vision. I'm going to establish a foundation in her name. Fund research, support young artists and scientists, make sure her contribution is recognized. That's beautiful, Noah said, as she could hear the genuine appreciation in his voice. But that's not what I want from you. Then what do you want? Noah pulled her closer until they were standing so near each other that Aurora could feel his breath against her forehead. I want you to stop punishing yourself for something that happened before you knew better. I want you to forgive yourself, the way Emma would have forgiven you if she'd been alive to meet you. And I want you to stay. Stay? Here, with us. With me? Noah's voice was steady but urgent, as if he was afraid she might disappear again if he didn't speak quickly enough. I want you to choose this life over the one that's pulling you back to Manhattan. I want you to choose love over guilt, hope over fear. Aurora looked into his eyes and saw something that took her breath away, not just forgiveness, but acceptance. Complete, unconditional acceptance of who she was, what she'd done, and who she was trying to become. It was the kind of love she'd never believed possible, the kind that didn't require perfection or demand payment for past mistakes. What about my company? She asked, though the question felt smaller now than it had an hour ago. What about it? Noah replied, You can run a company from anywhere these days. You can be the leader your employees need without sacrificing the family you found here. And Emma will always be part of our story, Noah said firmly. Not as a ghost or a guilt, but as the woman whose vision brought us together. The woman whose husband learned to love again because you were brave enough to find your way to our door. Aurora felt something break open in her chest, not the painful crack of something breaking, but the joyful release of something that had been held too tightly for too long. The guilt that had poisoned her success, the fear that had kept her from real intimacy, the belief that she had to earn love rather than simply accept it. I love you, she said, the words carrying more weight than any corporate presentation she'd ever delivered. I love you too, Noah replied, and then he was kissing her on his front porch as the last light faded from the sky, and their children's voices drifted from the kitchen, where they were probably wondering what was taking the adults so long to come inside. When they broke apart, Aurora could see the lighthouse beacon beginning its nightly rotation, casting its beam across water that had brought them together in ways they were still learning to understand. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, media attention, corporate reorganization, the complex logistics of blending their lives completely. But tonight, standing in the circle of Noah's arms, with Emma's ring still on her finger and their children's, laughter echoing from the house behind them, Aurora finally understood what home was supposed to feel like. 6 months later, Aurora stood in the same lighthouse where she and Noah had first talked about what mattered most, but everything about her life had transformed in ways she was still learning to appreciate. The keeper's quarters had been converted into the headquarters of the Emma Calder Foundation, where a small but dedicated team worked to support innovative research and provide opportunities for young artists and scientists whose ideas might otherwise go unrecognized. Through the lighthouse windows, she could see the harbor where her story with Noah had begun, the same weathered docks and working boats, but now also home to a state-of-the-art marine research station that bore Emma's name and studied the mathematical patterns underlying ocean systems. Aurora's company had not only survived her revelations, but had thrived under a new model of ethical innovation that credited sources and shared profits with communities that contributed to Their research the decision to relocate her primary residence to Millfield Cove had raised eyebrows in Manhattan business circles. But Aurora had discovered that running a global company from a coastal town was not only possible, but liberating. Video conferences with Tokyo happened from her home office, while Sophia and Lucas practiced piano in the next room. Board meetings were scheduled around school events and family dinners. The pace was different, more human, more sustainable than the relentless urgency that had once defined her professional life. "Mama, come see." Sophia called from the beach below, where she and Lucas were helping Jamie teach a group of younger children how to identify different types of seaweed. The three of them had slipped so naturally into sibling roles that visitors often assumed they'd always been a family unit rather than children who'd found each other through extraordinary circumstances. Aurora descended the lighthouse stairs, her hand trailing along the stone walls that had guided ships safely to harbor for over a century. Emma's compass still sat on her desk upstairs, its needle pointing true north with the same unwavering certainty that had guided its original owner. Through countless morning walks in search of artistic inspiration, on the beach she found Noah, supervising what appeared to be an advanced tide pool ecology lesson, his natural teaching ability on full display as he helped each child discover something wonderful in the miniature ecosystems revealed by the retreating Atlantic. He caught her eye across the group of young explorers and smiled, the same gentle expression that had first captured her attention but now weighted with a depth of shared experience and mutual understanding. "Mrs. Aurora," called one of the younger children, holding up a hermit crab with obvious pride. "Look what I found. Mr. Noah says he's probably been looking for a new shell for weeks." Aurora crouched beside the boy, examining his discovery with the serious attention that such findings deserved. "He's beautiful," she said, meaning it completely. "What do you think he'll do when he finds the perfect shell? Move in and make it his home forever." The boy replied with the confidence of someone who'd learned that finding the right place to belong was one of life's most important achievements. "That sounds like a very good plan," Aurora agreed, glancing up to find Noah watching their interaction with an expression that suggested he was thinking similar thoughts about homes and belonging and the unexpected ways that families formed. Later, as the educational beach expedition gave way to the evening routines that had become the rhythm of their blended household, Aurora found herself in the kitchen that had become the heart of their shared life. The new family portrait on the refrigerator showed all five of them on Christmas morning, surrounded by the chaos of wrapping paper and gift boxes, but radiating the kind of contentment that couldn't be posed or purchased. The portrait had replaced Emma's solo photograph, but not as an act of erasure. Emma's image had been carefully preserved in a beautiful frame on the mantel, surrounded by her paintings and the driftwood journal that had started everything. She was honored as part of their family story rather than forgotten or replaced, the woman whose vision had brought them together and whose memory continued to guide their choices. "How was the foundation meeting?" Noah asked, joining Aurora at the stove, where she was learning to make his grandmother's fish stew recipe with modifications that accommodated Sophia's seafood allergies and Lucas's preference for extra vegetables. "Productive," Aurora replied, stirring the pot and marveling at how domestic competence had become one of her prouder achievements. "We approved funding for 12 new research projects, including that fascinating study of coastal erosion patterns that Jamie suggested after his geography unit." It still amazed her how much wisdom their 8- and 9-year-old children possessed when adults were smart enough to listen to their observations. Jamie's question about why some beaches disappeared while others grew had led to a foundation-funded research project that was already producing insights about sustainable coastal management. "And the pregnancy?" Noah asked softly, his hand settling gently on Aurora's still flat stomach, where their shared future was taking shape in ways that felt like the most natural miracle in the world. Aurora smiled, leaning back against his chest and feeling the solid warmth of the man who taught her that love didn't require perfection, only honesty and courage. Dr. Martinez says everything looks perfect. Due date is still late September. They'd told the children about the baby the week before, news that had been received with a kind of enthusiastic planning that suggested this addition to their family would be the most welcomed child in Millfield Cove's history. Sophia was already designing nursery decorations. Lucas was practicing his big brother voice, and Jamie had begun carving a special mobile featuring boats and seagulls and tiny lighthouses. Emma would have loved this, Noah said quietly, and Aurora knew he was thinking not just about the baby, but about the entire life they'd built together, the foundation that honored his wife's contributions, the children who were thriving in ways that surprised even their optimistic parents, the love that had grown from tragedy and moral complexity into something stronger than either of them had thought possible. She's part of it, Aurora replied, meaning it completely. Every grant we award, every child who discovers something beautiful in a tide pool, every innovation that comes from recognizing rather than exploiting uncredited brilliance, that's Emma's legacy continuing to change the world. As they prepared dinner together, a ritual that had become sacred in its ordinariness, Aurora reflected on the unexpected paths that had led her to this moment. The yacht accident that had brought her to Millfield Cove, the storm that had forced her to stay, the discovery of Emma's journal that had nearly destroyed everything, but had ultimately made their love stronger and more honest. She thought about her corporate life, which continued but no longer consumed her identity. The company was performing better than ever, under leadership principles that prioritized ethical innovation and community benefit alongside profit. Her public acknowledgement of Emma's contribution had initially caused stock volatility, but had ultimately enhanced the company's reputation and attracted investors who shared Aurora's commitment to responsible business practices. The wedding planning had been a study in contrasts, Aurora's instinct for elaborate organization balanced by Noah's preference for meaningful simplicity. They'd settled on a ceremony at the lighthouse, surrounded by family and friends, with vows that acknowledged the complex journey that had brought them together. Emma would be honored not as a shadow from the past, but as the woman whose vision had made their love possible. As they sat down to dinner, all five of them around the table that had been built by Noah's grandfather and had hosted 3 generations of family meals, Aurora felt the deep satisfaction that came from choosing correctly when life offered impossible decisions. She'd risked everything for honesty and love, and had discovered that some gambles were worth taking regardless of the potential cost. "What are you thinking about?" Sophia asked, reading her mother's contemplative expression with the perceptiveness that had always been her superpower. "I'm thinking about how finding the right family is like finding the perfect shell," Aurora replied, remembering the hermit crab from that afternoon's beach lesson. "Sometimes you have to leave behind everything. You thought you wanted to discover what you actually needed, and then you move in and make it home forever," Lucas added, completing the metaphor with the wisdom of someone who'd learned that belonging was worth more than any treasure. Outside, the lighthouse beacon continued its ancient rotation, guiding travelers safely through waters that could be dangerous, but that also held possibilities for those brave enough to navigate their depths. Aurora reached across the table to take Noah's hand, Emma's ring still on her finger, but no longer a symbol of guilt. Now it represented the continuation of love in new forms, the way that loss could become the foundation for unexpected grace. Their children were already planning tomorrow's adventures, their voices blending in the kind of comfortable chaos that marked families who'd learned to create joy from ordinary moments. As Aurora listened to their laughter and felt the gentle movement of new life within her, she understood that she'd finally found her true north, not in corporate success or individual achievement, but in the simple courage to love completely and to build something beautiful from the intersection of past and present, loss and hope, truth and redemption. The ocean continued its eternal rhythm beyond their windows, bringing in tides that carried away what was finished and delivered what was needed, just as it had brought Aurora to this harbor, where she'd learned that sometimes the best rescue was allowing yourself to be saved.